familiar with the scene. A public space like a grocery store, a shopping mall, or an airport is disrupted by a child's complete meltdown. Driven by a powerful instinctual desire for something they cannot have, the child makes everyone nearby miserable with their screaming, uncontrolled crying, and aggressive tantrum throwing, even becoming physically and verbally aggressive toward the very people who care for and try to comfort them. The scene is one of pure, unbridled, and self-centered demand. And let's be honest with ourselves. We all just try to ignore it as long as it isn't our kid. This powerful image of the infantile tantrum perfectly mirrors the destructive character of a deeply ingrained, greedy personality in adulthood. Such an individual is fundamentally marked by an insatiable, selfish craving for more, be it money, professional status, political power, or material possessions. This core relentless desire is inextricably coupled with a profound, pervasive dissatisfaction with the present and a crippling lack of self-restraint or moral boundaries. This personality structure inevitably manifests in destructive and unethical behavior. The pursuit of gain becomes all-consuming, driving intense materialism and a deliberate disregard for the needs, feelings, or well-being of others. They are fixated on instant gratification, viewing any delay as intolerable injustice. The concept of genuine sharing or communal benefit is alien to them. They perceive resources as a zero-sum game that must be won. Consequently, they frequently resort to manipulating systems, exploiting loopholes, or coercing people to get ahead and maintain their advantage. For the greedy, life is perceived through a lens of profound scarcity and deprivation. No matter how much they accumulate, the things they possess are never and will never be enough to quiet the internal void. The cycle is self-perpetuating. Acquisition only fuels the demand for the next bigger prize. Greed in this pathological form is frequently intertwined with pathological narcissism. It acts not merely as a simple desire for wealth, but as a dysfunctional means to fill a deep internal deficit and to constantly elevate or prove social standing. To the accumulated things, the titles, the wealth, the luxury items become external evidence of superior worth. This relentless consuming behavior often originates from critical early life experiences where a person's intrinsic sense of value, acceptance, and affection became entirely conditional upon external, often material gain or achievement. The child learned that having was the only path to being loved, setting the stage for a lifetime of confusing self-worth with net worth. This foundational trauma drives a frantic and ultimately doomed attempt to heal an old wound with new possessions. While an individual's self-serving behavior typically affects only themselves and those in their immediate circle, this attitude becomes a source of systemic corruption when adopted by corporations and political entities. Corporations driven by greed prioritize profit over the well-being of their consumers and employees. They are willing to inflict long-term environmental damage to achieve short-term quarterly financial gains. And they financially influence politicians to pass legislation that serves their interests. Similarly, many politicians are motivated by financial greed, while others are driven by a desire for specific policies that benefit them personally or their perceived political faction. The current political landscape is utterly dominated by the growing and increasingly bizarre controversy surrounding the recent pronouncements of President Trump. His rhetoric, which seems to oscillate wildly between aggressive and cartoonishly audacious, has successfully overshadowed nearly all other major domestic and international issues. The most headline-grabbing of these statements, including his open discussion of making Canada the 51st American state, his comments on running the government of Venezuela following an unexpected regime change, and most recently, and perhaps most alarmingly, his threats to seize Greenland from Denmark by force. These seemingly random acts of political and territorial audacity are, in fact, often interconnected and intentionally deployed. The sheer volume and provocative nature of these statements seem to serve a clear purpose: to act as a colossal distraction. The consequence is that critical, important news stories, such as the recent and continuous developments in the unsealed portions of the long-running Epstein files, are simply being buried. These substantive issues, which carry far-reaching legal and political ramifications, are finding no air in the media environment, smothered beneath the escalating dominant controversy of Trump's latest and most outlandish geopolitical demands. The political conversation has been entirely shifted from accountability and policy to spectacle and territorial fantasy. The demand for Greenland has created a conflict with U.S. NATO allies. Since Greenland is an integral part of Denmark, similar to how Guam belongs to the U.S., an attack on Greenland would be considered an attack on a NATO-backed nation. This is significant because it would activate NATO's Article 5. NATO's Article 5 is the core of its collective defense commitment. It mandates that an armed attack against any member of Europe or North America is treated as an attack against all. This obligation requires allies to provide assistance, including the potential use of armed force, to restore security. Notably, Article 5 has only been invoked once, following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States. The proposed action would precipitate the total dissolution of NATO, effectively terminating its function as a mutual protective pact. This move would inevitably result in severe diplomatic conflict and a breakdown in security relationships with current allied nations. The immediate consequence of eliminating this cooperative defense framework is the removal of primary deterrent against large-scale aggression, the guarantee of a coordinated global response. The absence of a robust unified alliance structure would dismantle the established balance of power and create a geopolitical vacuum. This is a critical concern, as the breakdown of collective security would almost certainly embolden revisionist states such as Russia and China to pursue aggressive actions, potentially including military attacks on individual now isolated countries. The original function of a mutual defense organization like NATO was precisely to establish a clear collective response mechanism, a tripwire that was explicitly designed and implemented to avert the recurrence of a major devastating global conflict. Its dissolution would signal the end of the post-World War II security architecture and dramatically increase the probability of regional conflicts escalating into a larger international war. In an attempt to appease the American people, Trump has suggested that this policy will somehow reduce housing costs. However, the United States already has abundant land for new housing construction. The real problem is an artificial scarcity deliberately created by the investor class and corporations such as BlackRock. They inflate housing costs by keeping empty homes off the market, thereby increasing the sale or rental price of the properties they do release. Consequently, simply increasing the land area will not solve this fundamental issue. So why is he really doing this? Patience. I'm getting there. Trump asserts that U.S. national security demands the acquisition of Greenland to prevent its takeover by Russia or China, despite neither country demonstrating current interest in such a move. Russia remains bogged down in its protracted conflict with Ukraine, far exceeding the announced few days for the attempted annexation of the sovereign nation. Meanwhile, China's geopolitical focus is currently fixed on Taiwan and other Pacific nations. The US already maintains military bases in Greenland, along with numerous other NATO countries. Any US military action against Greenland, regardless of its outcome, risks prompting European NATO nations to reclaim the valuable military assets currently stationed within their borders. The geopolitical landscape is shifting dramatically, centered unexpectedly on Greenland. A torrent of investment from billionaires and powerful corporations is suddenly flooding the nation, meticulously targeting industries poised for immense profitability should the United States execute a potential takeover or establish a dominant sphere of influence. Greenland is no longer just an autonomous region of Denmark. It has become a strategic prize. The nation is a treasure trove of critical and rare earth minerals, resources that are highly valued by the world's most profitable corporations, particularly those within the burgeoning tech and military defense sectors. These entities stand to gain unprecedented and virtually unrestricted access to these resources at a fraction of the market rate, fueled by the promise of cheap, unburdened extraction under a new political arrangement. The danger, however, is profound and imminent. This beautiful, largely untouched, and sparsely populated nation is at grave risk of being fundamentally transformed. The ambition of these external corporate forces is to convert Greenland into a hollowed-out industrial wasteland. The devastation would be multifaceted. The pristine landscape would be mercilessly mined for corporate profits, while simultaneously being covered with vast complexes of energy-intensive AI data centers and defense infrastructure, effectively sacrificing the nation's natural heritage and the traditional way of life for geopolitical and corporate gains. Trump's stated intention to impose higher tariffs on nations that do not actively support the current geopolitical shifts represents a significant escalation, further straining already tense diplomatic and economic relations, particularly with key NATO allies. This unilateral move is widely anticipated to trigger retaliatory measures, threatening to ignite a global trade war and undermine the established international economic order. The implementation of such a policy will likely have a profound and detrimental effect on the American consumer. Tariffs are fundamentally a tax paid by the importer, which is then typically passed on to the end consumer. As a result, U.S. households will face a discernible increase in the cost of a vast array of imported goods. Beyond direct imports, the financial burden will extend to virtually all products manufactured using imported raw materials, components, or subassemblies, from automobiles and electronics to clothing and pharmaceuticals. Furthermore, industries relying heavily on imported machinery, specialized equipment, or international shipping and transport services will also see their operational costs rise, which will inevitably translate into higher retail prices. This broad-based inflation on essential and non-essential items alike threatens to exacerbate financial hardships, reduce disposable incomes, and potentially slow down domestic and economic growth by dampening consumer spending. So where do we go from here? Honestly, I'm uncertain. This latest controversy seems to demand more than just contacting our representatives. We are already aware that exercising our constitutional First Amendment rights exposes us to the risk of violence. Speaking out guarantees we will be branded as paid agitators, members of Antifa, or even labeled as terrorists, and imprisoned for our words. Despite these severe risks, we simply cannot afford to stay silent. Julian Casablancas said, "Greed is the inventor of injustice as well as the current enforcer. Trump is behaving like a child, throwing a tantrum to get what he wants. His behavior mirrors that of a 3-year-old who hasn't mastered potty training and feels entitled to every object in sight, regardless of any actual need. The primary objective is simply acquisition, with no consideration given to the clear, foreseeable consequences." That's all for this week. Until next time, remember, your silence is compliance, your voice is vital. Stand up, speak out, strike back. They don't know what they started. If you appreciate this content, please like, share, and subscribe. For updates, ring the bell. Your support really supports the channel.